But I do come at it from a practical perspective, being probably the only person in the room with a bionic enhancement. She looks around.
My exploration of future humans began about a decade ago when I met a man who had an ear surgically implanted into his arm.
Even if we technically and clinically can fix some of our shortcomings as humans, we still need to think about which aspects of being human actually are shortcomings, which of these changes might actually promise more than they can uphold, and what should we consider when we change ourselves in order to change ourselves into something better rather than just something different.
And I did pretty much what anybody here would do on meeting a man with an ear in their arm. I asked him the question, why? It looked at me with this big smile on his face, and he said, why not?
Francis Fukuyama famously wrote a book, Our Post-Human Future, where he threw every argument he could imagine on the wall to try to argue that human enhancement was really bad. It was risky, it would be having a lot of bad effects on society, but deep down there was this argument that it might change what it really means to be a human in such a way that it's not appropriate for humans to want to do that change. Now, transhumanism as a movement would respond by saying, no, wanting to change oneself is one of the most human things ever. That's close to the core of what it means to be a human, trying to become better, maybe failing at it, but still trying. Now, there is still a lot of risk involved in changing ourselves. You would really want to be very careful before you start modifying bodies on a large scale. We've seen in the past that many technologies overpromise. But there is also another interesting link to existential risk. Many of the earliest people who were concerned about existential threats to humanity were also transhumanists. And that might seem very strange, because aren't transhumanists these techno-optimists who think that we can solve everything with some nanomachines in the future? Why would they go on about total extinction or worse things? And the reason is, of course, if you're really optimistic about the future, you really want to get there and you want to safeguard it and want to make sure it happens. You might also be open to radical changes, and if you can have a radical change for good, you can also perhaps have radical change for bad, for the worse. So you really want to safeguard against that. And then comes the final little cherry on top. If you're optimistic about the future, you also think that we can do something about the threats facing humanity and get to the lovely futures that might be possible. If you think the future is meh, in that case, why save it? And besides, if you think you can't actually do anything useful to improve our chances, well, why are we even talking? Maybe we should just go to the pub and drown our sorrows. While the transhumanist optimistic view that maybe there is something we can do and the future could become radically well is a good reason to also try to fix things like bioweapons, nuclear weapons, asteroid impacts, and trying to make sure that if we get artificial intelligence, it's safe and beneficial and aligned with our interests.
Do not fall victim to clunky first-generation therapies that could have side effects. A majority of anti-aging products are patent pending. That means that they haven't been authorized. They're still waiting for their patents, and that's a very serious thing. So be careful. That's why the largest group I put is gather information, sit back and wait. Let other people be the guinea pigs. Don't do anything to your mind or body that you don't need, because it could cause an adverse reaction. So now we come to the point of biohackers. What about biohackers, those who are hacking their body and putting maybe magnets in their fingers or chips in their body? Well, that's very interesting, and Kevin Warwick and Steve Mann, both good friends of mine and who I respect and value very much, are thought leaders in that cyborg of the human biology. That's very interesting, but it's not about living longer, and it's not about taking charge or being the master of your fate and the captain of your ship in the journey of longevity. How we navigate that is very important. The difference between the cyborg and the transhuman is an important topic when we're talking about life and death. The cyborg is not a concept, a theory. It's not a philosophy, it's more a theoretical approach to the mechanization or the augmentation of the human. That is a concept, it's not actual process. The transhuman is part of an evolution of our biology as we merge with machines. So they're two different concepts. They overlap a bit, but I wanted to clarify that the cyborg is not actively participating in enhancement and augmentation. It's more of a passive approach. The transhuman is an active approach in looking at human evolution and merging with machines and enhancing and augmenting. At this point in my talk, I'd like to mention a few theories that are practice-based. One is morphological freedom. The concept of morphological freedom is that you have the right to augment, to enhance your body as long as it doesn't hurt or damage anyone else or the environment. Likewise, a person ought never to be coerced to augment, to enhance their body if they do not choose. So just because some people want to live a longer life and maybe upload or coexist as avatars in cyberspace does not mean that everyone has to. Diversification is extremely important, not only in our investment in our longevity, but also in our attitude about other people.
And you can imagine a 21st century totalitarian regime, a 21st century Stalin, that, Stalin worked mainly with social engineering. He maybe wanted to re-engineer human biology, but he couldn't. He dreamt about creating a new man, a new human, the new Soviet, but he only had social engineering. So in the end, when the Soviet Union collapsed, you still have human beings, like they were in 1917. And we start again. In the 21st century, a new Stalin might have the ability first to really re-engineer the body down to the level of DNA and create new human species, and perhaps even to create completely inorganic life forms. So we can imagine millions of years of a new evolutionary track beginning with some 21st century Stalin. And this is extremely frightening, especially because these kinds of people, they think in extremes. I talk a lot with scientists who are developing these technologies, whether it's CRISPR and genetic engineering, whether it's AI, and most of these people, they think not only in beneficial terms, but also in very narrow terms. Like, I'm doing my research in order to help cure Parkinson's disease. It's a leap of the imagination to think, what would the worst politician on earth do with the technologies that I'm developing? But as a historian, rather than as a biologist or as a computer scientist, this is the way my mind thinks. When somebody tells me how they are now using CRISPR to try and overcome Parkinson, I think, what would Stalin have done with it?
Yeah, well, from your perspective, what is it to be human? Has that changed? Has your view of that perhaps changed since you got your prosthetic?
So, as these guys say, I think to be human is to be explorative and adventurous and to adapt, but also it's to be varied. So one thing I can say is that there is somebody else in the world with a hand exactly like mine, and I don't think anyone else can say that. So just thinking about the different types of technology and what we can implement, if we start to all wear bionic hands, then we all have the same hand, and we take away something that is very crucial to us being humans, which is that we are all different. So how do we need to make sure that we maintain that identity and that being able to be our own unique people, and we don't become some sort of identikit clones, which is definitely a very extreme ideal, but not something, as a as a concept, I think we can all agree that we don't want that. So how do we let technology adapt our bodies, and how do we become enhanced by technology, but without becoming identikit?
So the definition of a human has to include room for variation.
Yes.
And do you consider your hand to be human, or?
No, it's become part of me in the sense that it's a possession that I care a lot about, and at times I've had, negative reactions if somebody's touched it when I didn't want them to, possibly in a similar way to if somebody picked up my phone that I didn't know. So in a way, it's become part of me, but it's not human.
Okay, so going from this starting point of what we understand a human being to be, should we enhance ourselves? Nicky, if I can go back to you first, actually, because obviously you're on the panel, and a lot of people would think that your hand is an enhancement. First of all, do you consider it that way?
I think it's an adaptation for me. You could say it was an enhancement because it enabled me to do a few things that I couldn't do before I had it. So just to give you some background, I was born without my right hand, and then I got this one a year ago when I was 29. So I'd already learned how to do everything in life without it, and then I learned how to do everything in life with it, so that I had that choice. So in that sense, it does enhance me slightly. But I would, as well as this being an enhancement that I've obviously embraced, I could never argue that we shouldn't enhance ourselves, because I imagine everybody in this room already has. If anybody's taken the contraceptive pill, they have made a choice and they have chosen to enhance themselves by not getting pregnant, or they've been vaccinated and they've chosen to enhance themselves by not getting rabies. I don't know. So we already do things that prolong our lives and make us last longer in this world. I don't think anybody would turn around and say, actually, I don't want my great uncle with cancer to have chemotherapy. I'd rather he just died and was, part of natural selection. So there's no way I would argue that we shouldn't enhance ourselves.
Do you know, Yuval, just to tell you this, I learned from some collection of texts, ideological debates, and practical experiments. You know that Stalin tried already to do this. In the late 20s, Stalin was convinced by some stupid biologists that with some machinations, I don't know how, to create a perfect worker which can read, write elementarily, but is too stupid to organize socially, to rebel, by coupling humans and apes. And they tried to do it. He sent a delegation to Congo. They import about 30 gorillas, I think, apes, and typical male chauvinism, women apes.
Of course.
And they, what can we do? That, yeah. And then they selected 4 very strong Russian, strong farmer men. They made them copulate. Okay, it didn't work. And then,
well, I was going to say, and that's how I came to be a biologist.
Yeah. And then Stalin had to discover that this scientist was really a British spy, you know the story. And but what I'm saying is that Stalin was already, forget about so-called egalitarianism of communism. What egalitarianism? Stalin was the first who consciously tried to create a specific race of workers who just work with modest, shitty food without protest and so on. Once we have Life 2.0, this retroactively changes also, in our view, not in reality, what life, the first life is. Because life becomes just a combination of transparent algorithms, biological, and so on and so on. And that's my problem with, would you agree, Yuval, with liberal conservatives, I cannot call them in another way, like Jürgen Habermas, whose solution is, since brain sciences today, by penetrating our brain and manipulating our DNA, are threatening our ethical self-understanding, we should put a limit on science. We should simply say, Bill McKibben, who wrote a book, enough, like this should be the limit. But what I'm saying is that once, for example, sorry, you again, I cannot.
Okay, I'm here
once
for
this. I can, through some surgery or whatever, technical means, chemical, change your mind, that you become more brutal, more decisive, more intelligent. This means that already before I intervened, your mind functioned at this level. It was just different chemistry and so on. So I think that with post-humanity, nature also will, in some sense, no longer be nature. It will become another mechanism. Second point, what is, Yuval, your final solution, namely with this, that's the big focus on your work, post-human, whatever they are. Namely, like what, maybe you wrote after your book on Homo Deus, but what intrigues me, what is the real horror for me, but maybe there is some other emancipatory potential, is it's so-called wired brain, Neuralink, and so on.
Right.
The idea, because our basic idea of human freedom, at its most basic, is even if I am in chains, can do nothing, you don't control my thoughts. I can think what I think. But even the moment you get direct interaction between my flow of thoughts and a machine, of course, as Yuval said wonderfully, immediately the scientific manipulators will bring a good medical example to justify it. Like I already said, a guy who couldn't, it's real, move his penis, they manipulate it now, thinking about it, he could do it. But what other things can you do? Because if you can control movements outside just with your brain, it goes also the other way around. And what I don't have a good answer is this really the end of freedom? What is freedom? Is freedom just what we call, some philosophers, the user's illusion? Or now I expect the answer. Now I have what you said, trust in humans and faith, faith in humans.
Yes.
Okay, I have faith in you to provide the answer. Yeah.
The best way to describe this is with an example of a guy called Neil Harbisson. Does anybody know who Neil Harbisson is? A couple of folks. So Neil Harbisson is a colorblind artist, and he has an antenna surgically implanted into his head that allows him to hear color. Now, the wild thing about Neil Harbisson is that antenna, he's had it for over a decade. It's now surgically implanted into his skull. Before that, it was a wearable device. And for Neil, that antenna is no longer a tool or technology. He sees it quite literally as an organ. Going up to Neil and touching his antenna is like if I went up to you, sir, and I tried to touch your nose, you'd find it kind of odd. And he's so integrated it into his body's schema that he now dreams in sonochromatic dreams. So he'll have these dream states where all of the colors in his dream will match the agency of the device that sends these light waves to sound waves through his skull. And again, Neil is an outlier, but he talks about being psychological cyborgs. You guys are going, this cyborg thing is kind of stupid, it's kind of weird, it's kind of fringe, but we love to say, I bet you all have iPhones in your pockets, nestled next to your genitals or next to your heart. So, to a degree, that all makes us cyborgs, ? And we'll get to that shortly, because the stuff that I really am interested in is when it does affect neurophysiology, neuroplasticity, when these sorts of devices change the relationship in the brain, where we start to accept that this is no longer an external tool, technology, device, it's actually part of ourselves. And the place I saw that most beautifully demonstrated was after an event very much like this. There was a guy, the late, great Nigel Ackland. Does anybody know who Nigel Ackland is? A couple of guys at the back, they are my friends, so of course you know. Nigel Ackland, for those who don't know, was the pioneering pilot of the Bionic prosthetic limb. So he had this beautiful fiberglass prosthetic limb. And I used to witness, he would stand on stages like this and show everybody his bionic prosthetic limb. And he was a working class man. He lost his arm in a factory accident. And people would look with desire at this fiberglass object that he was holding up in the sky. And I would see people come up to him afterwards and grab him outside of the speaker's tent and go, "Oh my God, how do I get one of those?" They had this kind of weird techno-fetishism for what they perceived to be a vision for the future of humanity. And Nigel would look at them with a wry smile, and he would go, "Well, mate, it's the most exclusive club in the world, and it's going to cost you an arm or a leg to get in, so you've got to pick." You know, a lot of people would ask Nigel, "Do you feel enhanced? Are you enhanced by having the prosthetic limb? You lost your arm, yes, but now you have this beautifully designed prosthetic from Bionic. Do you feel enhanced?" And in answer to that question, he would rotate his wrist 360 degrees and say, "Well, I'm not enhanced, but I'm certainly differently abled." And anybody who does think I'm enhanced should realize that being able to turn your wrist 360 degrees becomes a real challenge when it comes to wiping your own arse.
What will transhuman and posthuman life be like? The only sensible answer I can give you is I don't know. But one of the many reasons for stressing recalibration is that by raising hedonic set points, it's not necessary for you or almost anyone else to sacrifice their existing values and preferences. Crudely, it just means that you can wake up in the morning feeling in a fantastically good mood and pursue whatever you consider most valuable or worthwhile as now. Now, that's a rather bioconservative answer. In practice, I think mastery of our reward circuitry, intelligence amplification, radical life extension is going to transform the nature of life in ways that far beyond the pleasure-pain axis. But yes, I regard a precondition of any civilized society is that we get rid of involuntary suffering, any state below hedonic zero.